NPR.
In Afghanistan, you've got General Dunford saying that progress is still not sustainable. Of course, everyone knows you have until the end of next year until all the combat troops pull out. But wouldn't you like to armed forces were able to sustain their progress right now? And meanwhile, you've got 2 NATO tankers being torched in Pakistan today as a result, apparently, of increased U.S.-Pakistani tensions. How do you have concerns that this situation between the United States and Pakistan is going to complicate NATO's downsizing and its ongoing operations? Thank you.
First, on the sustainability of the Afghan security forces. Actually, we got an excellent briefing by COMISAF General Dunford during the last defense ministers meeting. And I think there is a broad agreement that the Afghan security forces have made strong progress, that they are increasingly capable of taking responsibility for the security all over Afghanistan. And we are all confident that they will be able to take full responsibility for the security by the end of 2014 as planned. Let me remind you that there's still some time to go. We are still training, educating, giving advice to the Afghan security forces. And even beyond 2014, we will still be there to help the Afghan security forces through training, advising, assisting them. So that's the essence of COMISAF's briefing, that obviously the Afghan security forces will still need our assistance, and that's exactly the purpose of the Operation Resolute Support that we are planning to establish from the 1st of January 2015. On the last part of your question, I don't have detailed information about recent incidents in Pakistan, and I'm definitely not going to guess about motives, but I feel confident that the Pakistani authorities will do all they can to secure transit through Pakistan, because at the end of the day, that's also in Pakistan's own interest.
Una?
Nawab Khan from the Kuwait News Agency. Mr. Secretary General, it is linked with the previous question actually. It's on the drone strikes last week in Pakistan, in which the Taliban leader Hakimullah Masood was killed. Following that, several Pakistani politicians have called for a stop to the NATO supply route going to Afghanistan. So are you concerned that this might happen? And my second question is, generally, what is NATO's view on the drone strikes? Do you think it is contributing to restore stability and peace, or creating more resentment among the population? Thank you.
First, on supply routes or transit routes through Pakistan, I hope that they will remain open. I feel confident that the Pakistani authorities will maintain open supply routes and transit routes, because it is in Pakistan's own interest to contribute positively to stability and security in the region. On drone strikes, first of all, I have no comments on specific reports in that regard, But in general, let me stress that terrorism constitutes a threat to the whole region. We also know that the security of Afghanistan and Pakistan is interlinked. There can't be security in the one country without security in the other. And finally, we do realize that Pakistan herself has also been the victim of terrorism. And the Pakistani people, the Pakistani society suffer a lot from terrorism. And I can assure you that we stand together in combating that evil. And that's exactly what I discussed with Prime Minister Zarif when I met him some weeks ago.
We had Agence Europe over there.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Secrétaire Général, Yann Cordis, Europe Diplomatie et Défense. I have two questions on NATO-Russia relations. A few days ago, the Russian president decided to dissolve the Russian interagency working group on the missile defense cooperation with NATO, and he also eliminated the special envoy position to NATO on this subject. So first question, what is your opinion on this? Do you think it puts an end to the structural dialogue between NATO and Russia on missile defense? And second question, could you remind us what was the latest proposition from NATO to kind of break the ice on this matter? Thank you.
First, on the internal Russian organization or the interagency organization of missile defense deliberations, I have no comments on that. It is absolutely an internal Russian matter how they want to organize their interagency procedures. You ask me whether that decision would have an impact on the dialogue between Russia and NATO on missile defense, or whether it would mean an end to the structured dialogue on missile defense. No, we still have our NATO-Russia structures. They are not impacted by internal Russian decisions on interagency structures. We do have NATO-Russia structures, namely the NATO-Russia Council. And I envisage a dialogue on missile defense to continue within that framework. Actually, less than 2 weeks ago, we had a NATO-Russia Council at defense ministers level, and we discussed missile defense. And I would envisage such discussions to continue. So we do have a structured dialogue within the NATO-Russia Council. Having said that, there's no reason to hide that we do not agree yet on missile defense. As you know, we have invited Russia to cooperate on missile defense, and you asked me if I could refresh memories on our latest proposals as to how we could move forward that cooperation. I could mention one very concrete proposal we have tabled. We have suggested to establish 2 jointly staffed missile defense centers. Centers that could constitute a framework for exchange of data, preparation of joint exercises, the elaboration of joint threat analysis, just to mention some issues that could be addressed within the framework of such 2 jointly staffed centers. So it's a concrete example of how we want to establish a framework so that the Russians can see with their own eyes that our system is a purely defensive system. It's not a system directed against Russia.
I had the Japanese press over there.
I'm Takashi with NHK Japan Broadcasting. I have a follow-up question in regards to the killing of the Taliban, Pakistani Taliban leader. Pakistani government has been critical about this incident because it might backfire in terms of their effort to talk with Taliban for the negotiated process. And how do you respond? What do you think of the impact of this killing of Pakistani Taliban leader to your effort in Afghanistan? Thank you.
As I said, I don't have any comments on these concrete reports. But in general, we are, of course, very much concerned about terrorism, international terrorism, as well as terrorism in the region. And terrorism is a threat to the whole region. I do believe that there is a growing awareness in the region of the need to engage constructively with each other, with the aim to ensure long-term peace and stability. And I do believe that the Pakistani authorities, government as well as the military, do realize that it's also in Pakistan's interest to ensure peace, security and stability in Afghanistan. Stability along the western Pakistani border is definitely in Pakistan's self-interest.
Thomas Lauritsen from the Danish newspaper Politiken. Concerning steadfast jazz, the Russians have been critical of this exercise taking place so close to their borders, talking about it reviving Cold War memories and things like that. What's your response to that?
I don't see any reasons for those Russian concerns. The exercise Steadfast Jazz is not an exercise directed against Russia. It's a NATO exercise with the aim to test the NATO response force and test our ability to work together. Exercise Steadfast Jazz takes place in Poland and Latvia because Poland, as well as the 3 Baltic states, offered to host this year's Steadfast Jazz exercise. But let me remind you that we have conducted a lot of Steadfast Jazz exercises during recent years. Actually, I think 17 exercises taking place in 14 different countries. And as I mentioned, we are already now planning a new exercise to take place in 2015, which will be hosted by 3 countries in the southern part of Europe, namely Italy, Spain, and Portugal. So these exercises take place in different places within NATO territory, which I think is quite normal. And finally, we have provided full transparency. We have invited Russian observers to have a look at the exercise. So we have nothing to hide. The Russians can see with their own eyes that this exercise is meant to test our ability to work together. It's not directed against Russia.
James.
Yes, Brooks Tigner, Jane's Defense. I want a follow-up question on MD. I mean, regardless of whether there's an MD structure within the NATO-Russia Council, the fact that Russia has eliminated all interagency cooperation on the issue is significant, and it suggests that Russia is moving away from NATO on MD. And yet, at the same time, the two sides have just finished their technology demonstrator Standex, to guard against IED attacks in urban environments. How do you explain the contradictory trends? And secondly, have the allies agreed on the future budgetary resources needed to carry out those 5 CFI connected forces aspects that you described, or does that debate still lie ahead of us? Thank you.
First of all, let me stress that I'm not suggesting that it will be an easy task to reach an agreement with Russia on missile defense cooperation. In no way was that what I tried to express. On the contrary, we do know that we are faced with huge challenges when it comes to missile defense. But what I stressed was that it is an internal Russian decision how they will organize the interagency procedures, and that decision doesn't affect our framework for a NATO-Russia dialogue on missile defense, which will still take place within the NATO-Russia Council. But we do know also from the discussion we had a couple of weeks ago among defense ministers that we still have our disputes. We are far from an agreement on missile defense. But still, I appeal to the Russians to understand that it's also in their interest to cooperate on missile defense, because the Russian people are also threatened by or a potential target of missile attacks. And through cooperation, we could make a Russian missile defense as well as our missile defense much more efficient. And that's why we have taken concrete steps, including suggesting 2 jointly staffed centers to promote such cooperation. I hope the dialogue will continue, but I do realize that it will be difficult. On the Connected Forces Initiative and resources, we are still working on that. Now the political decision has been made on 5 very important elements in this overall Connected Forces Initiative. And we will continue work in the run-up to the NATO summit in 2014. And obviously, such political decision will also be followed by decisions to resource that policy appropriately.
Going to Reuters at the front.
Adrian Croft with Reuters, Secretary General. Had 2 questions, if I may. One was about, after the NATO-Russia Council, you raised the possibility that NATO and or Russia could help eliminate serious chemical weapons. I wonder if there'd been any developments in that area. And the second question was in relation to the Kosovo election violence. I understand that the aim had been to reduce K4 force levels where in the future, if possible. Is that going to change the timetable for downsizing K4, do you think, what happened yesterday? Thanks.
The first on NATO-Russia cooperation on chemical weapons, I think I answered, if I remember the question I got correctly, I answered that if there were to be a request from the United Nations to assist OPCW in carrying out their important task to eliminate chemical weapons in Syria, I think members of the NATO-Russia Council would consider it. But we haven't received such a request. I also stressed that the United Nations and OPCW are in the lead of those efforts in Syria. Now, on K4, we have no intention to reduce the K4 presence for the time being. you are probably referring to previous plans to further reduce the KFOR presence, but those plans have been put on hold because we consider it important to make our contribution to the implementation of the political agreement between Belgrade and Pristina. And when that political agreement was signed, both parties requested NATO assurance that we would stay and ensure full implementation of the United Nations Resolution 1244 and ensure a safe and secure environment and freedom of movement for all people. And it's our intention to stay as an impartial guarantor of peace and stability. And I think recent incidents just stress how important it is that we continue to carry out that task.
Gérard Gaudin, Belgian News Agency. You told us that you, I think, proposed to establish 2 missile defense centers. Is that a NATO proposal, and what was the initial Russian answer to that?
Yes, it is a NATO proposal, but actually, if I may add to that, inspired by a previous Russian suggestion. So we would have expected a more positive response to that, but so far we have not received a positive response.
One last question over there.
Is this okay? Has NATO already convinced the Turkish government not to buy the Chinese rockets?
No, but it's not for NATO to decide. As I have stressed previously, it remains a national decision to decide which military equipment to acquire. Having said that, I have also stressed that seen from an alliance perspective, it is, of course, of utmost importance that systems acquired by allies can work and operate together. And I feel confident that the Turkish government, the Turkish military, the Turkish authorities are aware of that very important aspect.
Thank you very much indeed.